What if I told you there was a legal way to ignore endangered species protections? Not accidentally, not illegally, but officially. Because that's exactly what just happened in the Gulf of Mexico. And the question is, what happens to an ocean ecosystem when protection becomes optional? Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ocean Decoded. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is where we break down what's happening in the ocean, some of the policies, some of the science, some of the exploration, and we just break it down here so you can understand it better, so you can make better decisions for the ocean. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a recent decision that was made by the God Squad, where they started to say, hey, you know what, if you want to develop oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico, you can do whatever you want with it. You don't have to follow endangered species laws, and you can ignore those. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But, you know, the Gulf of Mexico is very important. It's not just about water. It's one of the most productive marine ecosystems in the world. It supports fisheries, coastal communities, and endangered species that are already on the edge. And now, a decision has been made by something called the Endangered Species Committee, or also known as the God Squad, that could allow oil and gas development to move forward even if it harms those species. This isn't just a policy shift. It's a test of what conservation laws are actually worth when they get in the way. Now, if you're interested in this type of material and you want to know more, hit that subscribe button so you make sure you get every episode that we put out on this channel. Here's where it gets interesting. The Endangered Species Committee, often nicknamed the God Squad, was created under the Endangered Species Act. Its job? To make extremely rare decisions about whether economic growth can override species protection. In other words, it can decide if a species is worth saving, believe it or not. And historically, it almost never gets used. But in this case, it actually did. So who actually pays the price here? One of the biggest concerns is the Rice's whale. This whale lives almost entirely in the Gulf of Mexico, where we're talking fewer than 100 individuals left. That's not a population, that's a tipping point at this point. Oil and gas development brings seismic surveys, which blast sounds through the ocean, ship traffic, which increases collision risks, pollution from spills and routine operations. And for a species that's already hanging on, this isn't just pressure. It's potentially the final push to go extinct. Now, here's where the tension really builds within the species and within this decision. The supporters of the decision argue that the Gulf is critical for U.S. energy production. Restricting development could impact jobs and energy security, and existing protections are too restrictive for economic growth. And they'll say, we can develop responsibly. This is the classic trade-off, energy versus environment. We see this every single time. But here's the problem. The trade-off assumes something very dangerous, that the ecosystem can absorb the damage. Now, let's all remember that the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico is still affecting the Gulf of Mexico to this day, and it was done like 16 years ago. So how can we say that the Gulf of Mexico can handle this type of disaster? Because it really can't. And here's what most people don't realize. Ecosystems don't collapse just all at once. They degrade quietly, piece by piece. When you remove protections for one species, and you don't just lose that species, you lose a lot of other things. You lose its role in the food web, its influence on prey populations, its connection to habitat health. In the Gulf, that could mean a number of things. It could mean shifts in fish population, impacts on commercial fisheries, and long-term instability for coastal economies. So the real question isn't, can we afford to protect species? It's, can we afford not to? Here's the part most people miss. The Endangered Species Act was designed to be a line in the sand, a law that says some things are too important to lose. But the moment that exceptions become easier, that line starts to move. And when the line moves, protection stops being protection. It becomes a negotiation. This decision isn't just about one whale or one region. It's about whether conservation laws hold up when they face economic pressure. Because if protections can be bypassed here, they can be bypassed anywhere. And the ocean doesn't recover based on policy intentions. It recovers based on what actually gets protected. This is not just a phenomenon that happens in the US. This happens all over the world. And in fact, it happens in my home country, Canada. It happened back in the early 2010s. When the Conservative government was in power and Prime Minister Harper was in power, he decided to change the laws of the fisheries habitat protection, called the Fisheries Act. He changed the law so that the fisheries habitat was not protected for fisheries. It was only just protecting the fish in the fisheries. So if a fisheries was established for more than 30 years, that would be protected. But you wouldn't protect the habitat because, God forbid, fish don't need habitat to live. I'm being sarcastic here. Yes, they do. We need that habitat to be protected as soon as possible and as much as possible. But they didn't care about that. All the government cared about was putting a pipeline from one place to another, and whatever was in its way, it didn't matter what was going to happen. They just wanted it to go through as fast as possible. And the reason why a lot of these regulations, especially environmental regulations, are there is so that we don't make decisions too fast and we don't lose the environment. Because when we lose the environment and we lose species, we lose biodiversity. And when we lose biodiversity, we lose stability. I've talked about this on my podcast, How to Protect the Ocean. I've talked about this on this YouTube channel. This is extremely important. When we lose biodiversity, we lose stability. We lose stability on land, in the water, in the ocean, in the sky. We cannot lose stability. That is what makes our world work. And when it doesn't work, when we lose stability, we get chaos. And chaos does not produce good economies. And so it's important that we keep Endangered Species Act intact, that we keep following those policies, and that we continue to pressure governments to follow those policies, especially when they want to kind of leave and just be like, you know what, I don't need to worry about this. This is not a time where we have to beg for these species to be protected. They're already protected under law. We shouldn't just be ignoring them, and the government should not have the decision to just ignore it, because like even in this situation with the Gulf of Mexico, if you ignore these species at risk laws, these endangered species laws, you ignore it for 30 years. Because as these things develop, as these oil and gas leases develop, it'll take 20 to 30 years just to go into production, just to even drill. And so all of the development that goes on, that's going to affect these species for 20 to 30 years. It's not going to affect the species now. It's going to affect them now and beyond. And so when we're looking at this type of development, we're looking at long-term changes, not just short-term changes. They're making it think like, hey, you know what? Just for now, we're going to ignore the endangered species. The rice is, well, it'll be fine. It's just temporary. But the thing is as you build these out, as you build these oil and gas platforms out, as you start to drill more and more and more, this stuff stays for decades, even longer, in terms of like when those wells are done and they try and cap them, they don't cap them. They never really cap them. And there's little oil leaks all over the place. And then what are the people in the Gulf of Mexico supposed to do after that when they leave? They don't just help them out. They just leave and that's it. There's no money in it. There's no money left of that well. We're just going to leave, and whoever was working on that well is going to have to find work somewhere else. These short-term decisions have long-term effects, not only on the ocean, not only on endangered species, but on the local communities that live around the Gulf of Mexico. These local communities that depend on the Gulf of Mexico for their earnings, for their life. It's bigger than just another development project. It's bigger than just, even if you think that endangered species aren't worth to protect, it's bigger than that. It's about protecting the environment and protecting the coastal community. The BP oil spill did not happen long ago. It happened 16 years ago. A lot of us were alive when it happened, watched it on TV when it happened, watched the devastation to the environment as well as the local communities when it happened. We cannot allow the Gulf of Mexico to be the same thing every, 20 years, every 30 years or whatever. This never needed to happen, and ignoring policy like this is a very bad precedent to set for the future of the ocean in general, especially in and around the U.S. And of course, other countries will see this, and the U.S. is a lot of times has been in the past leaders in policies, especially environmental policies. When other countries see that they ignore it, they can probably say, hey, we can ignore it as well. So it's something that we have to be careful of in every country, including my own. And it's something that we need to continue to make sure that governments abide by these policies. I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. And I'd love to hear your comments on what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico and on policy in general, and governments ignoring policy whenever they feel it's convenient. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Let me know in the comments below. And I would love for you to stick around, subscribe, join me on other ocean breakdowns. If you enjoy and you want more of these breakdowns, please feel free to subscribe and leave a comment below. Hit that notification so you don't miss any other future episodes. We're going to be putting them out on a regular. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Ocean Decoded. My name is Andrew Lewin, your host. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.